Table for two, please. Hello, and welcome back to Table for Two.
My name's Amy.
And my name is Viveka. And today we're going to do one of our informative / opinion piece episodes. And we're going to be talking about influencer culture and content creator culture.
To begin, what defines an influencer?
So essentially, it's someone who has a following or presence on some type of social platform.
And today we're going to be defining influencers as encompassing content creators, social media stars, celebrities, etc. So we might be using these terms interchangeably.
Yep. Well, first, let's talk about whether people are really influenced by influencers. And personally, I feel like you can really see these through trends and pop culture, and consumer culture in general, because, for example, a lot of clothing styles are brought into trend by influencers, for example, Emma Chamberlain, and those clothes and that style of clothing in general will blow up, and that's a trend, and that is because people were influenced by an influencer.
And even if the trend started small, and then if an influencer picks up on it, then it reaches a lot more people because now it's cool or something.
Yeah, it's broadcasted to a much broader range of people.
And it's that one type of diffusion in AP Human.
That was 3 years ago. I'm sorry, AP Human teacher that I won't name. Yeah. You were a real one, though.
I don't remember it. It was less than half a year ago. I don't remember it.
Like Amy was saying, influencers have a following for a reason, and people may not directly realize that this new interest or this new trend is credited to influencers, but it usually is.
Mm-hmm. And a quote from 2019 influencer marketing survey from Rakuten Marketing states that 4 in 5 surveyed U.S. consumers, which is 81%, have made a purchase through clicking a link or an image that an influencer shared.
So you can obviously see that there is stats to kind of back up the fact that people are influenced by influencers.
That's why influencers are called influencers.
Wow, Amy. You're so smart.
I'm so perceptive of the world around me.
You understand English.
Generally, there's a sort of standard and a set of expectations that a lot of people have for influencers. And one of them is that they have to be passionate and they have to be genuine. But the thing is, on social media, what you see, it seems like they're passionate because, of course, this is their brand. This is their facade to the world. Yeah. Obviously, they have to be passionate, act passionate about it. And although there are a lot of influencers who are really open with their motivation and their struggles and stuff, there's still a barrier between their real life and what they decide to reveal on the internet.
As for being genuine, I feel like this is a personal thing of mine, but I feel like no one can really be genuine in real life. I know that's such a weird statement to make, but for example, if I came up to you and I was like, hey, Amy, I know we've been friends for so long, but I need you to do this for me. It feels so I'm using you, kind of. So I feel like that can be translated into influencers. As much as they want to be hey, I love all of my followers or whatever, but it's kind of hard to be genuine because it's in the end, you're hey, if you click on this link, I'm going to make money. So I need you guys to click on this link for me.
It's definitely possible for content creators, influencers to be really, really appreciative and love their fans in that way, but obviously it's not a personal connection.
Yeah, it seems fake. And although sometimes sure it might be genuine, but whenever I think of influencers, it never really feels genuine because in the end they need something from you. But I feel that's the expectation people or brands have whenever they reach out to influencers or content creators. You need to love my brand and I need you to sell my brand for the people, which kind of just boils down to a very capitalistic notion of influencer culture and consumer culture in general.
Yeah.
There's another expectation that influencers need to have a constant source of content. For example, influencers can never take a break or they always need to be coming out with brand new, interesting topics.
And the thing is that that's why a lot of influencers have their own niche of what they're doing. Content creators create videos with a niche topic, like if they find something that does well and is unique to them, or like then they'll continue to make content with that. And the thing is, they create a lot of content and they create it at a very constant pace because of marketing and algorithm and just how social media is structured. Because if you don't post for a while on Instagram, then your posts aren't going to show up on people's feeds. You won't be the first story they see when they click in Instagram, and that just brings down your reach and brings down everything. So content creators are definitely pressured to put out a lot of content in a short amount of time just to keep their stuff going.
And once again, like the whole notion of you need to constantly be making something is also a very capitalistic, consumer culture type notion, because if you want people, you need to continue to work and you need to mindlessly work forever and forever. Another expectation that people have for influencers, and especially for younger influencers, as I've noticed, is that they need to be extremely educated and up to speed on societal issues, which is very problematic, and we will expand on this in a bit. But it kind of leads to the... Wait, you wrote this?
Yeah. It leads to the creation... It leads to the creation of a perfect, quote-unquote, image of these influencers, and people become, understandably disappointed when the influencer fails to meet those standards. But these influencers, they shouldn't be put on such a high pedestal in the first place, Especially since these influencers, they're getting younger and younger. Like, there are people my age, people like literally like a year older than me, and they're into this content creation scene. But they shouldn't be expected to have such an in-depth knowledge of societal issues and all that, because a lot of times they're kids and they might have grown up in very sheltered...
Yeah. So basically, going off what Amy said, we live in a pretty sheltered area of America. Okay.
of this country.
Going off of what Amy said, we can kind of relate this back to our own personal experiences, as we live in a pretty sheltered community ourselves, and it's shocking to see how some of these people are so unaware of things that happen in this world, and it's kind of expected because, well, they haven't been exposed to these kinds of hardships that a majority of people have to go through.
And I think this is true for a lot of us. Since last year, since there was a rise in social justice with a lot of different movements.
Yeah.
And
like, it's great to see how people are finally learning and educating themselves. But when they twist around the whole notion of improving society into a more selfish view and saying that I don't have privilege, or like I, in some like roundabout manner, am also oppressed, quote unquote, or like, they just like misuse terms and things. It's a thought.
I understand what you're talking about, because the thing is, like, I am privileged in a way. I'm privileged in a lot of ways.
Same.
And Viveka is as well. We're both privileged for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing to accept that. Being privileged doesn't mean you're a bad person. Not necessarily. It just means that you don't have to face the hardship that somebody else does for something.
Yeah, and now the scenario would be completely different if Amy and I were to completely reject that and say that, because of blank and blank, we are oppressed and we aren't privileged, or, like, this negates all of the privilege that we have, but no.
Yeah, we are privileged in some areas, but that doesn't but we can't use our struggles to justify we don't have privilege. Almost all influencers are on social media, and telling influencers to stop censoring their content, and by this I mean demanding them to only talk about or do kid-friendly things that you'd only see on like PBS Kids or something. Of course, not like nothing NSFW, And it's so confusing because there is an age limit on social media for a reason. Young kids and younger middle schoolers who are easily influenced, they shouldn't be on social media if they can't make these decisions of right or wrong for themselves. They shouldn't be on social media like this if they're going to be influenced so strongly and they can't think critically for themselves. There's an age limit for a reason. Kids should not be on social media until a certain time for a reason. It's definitely harmful for the kids' development, and I've experienced some of this firsthand. And if you are a kid and you are getting offended, I hate to break it to you. You're probably too young to be on social media.
Yep. A great deal of the issues that we just discussed is directly related to the toxicity of an influencer's fan base or following. And a fan base's expectations for a certain content creator or influencer can be extremely harmful, especially when they don't line up with an influencer. So for example, maybe this person has outgrown the kind of content that they put out and wants to move on and create other things. If the fan base really, really likes the old content that they put out, then and respond to this new change with a lot of hate, it's on the fan base. It's not necessarily on the influencer for trying to change.
Because in the end, you are a fan and you are not the one with this platform. Although you can definitely also influence what the creator makes, it's not necessarily your call to, demand something of them.
And one of these examples is JoJo Siwa. Because I feel like she's 19, she's older than Amy and I, and her content is still very much kids-centered. And when she came out too, she was met with a lot of backlash because they were like, a lot of kids watch this, a lot of kids watch you, why would you do this? And I was like, what is she doing wrong?
Yeah, first off, the reason why there is so much homophobia in the world is because parents pass it down to their kids. It's generational.
Yeah.
And kids are taught that, is that being part of the LGBTQ plus community is bad or something, which it isn't. And that's what kids grow up with, and that's what kids grow up knowing.
And this is definitely reinforced by media to some extent, because a lot of the content that we see in the media is very straight. It's very much cis and straight. So people, when they see someone who is not cis and who is not straight, they can't help but feel like, what? That's so weird, even though it's literally normal. It's just they were never represented properly. And another thing that I've seen quite a bit is toxic followship / fan wars, where fans will defend content creators like without critically thinking about the content and their stance on it.
Yeah, a lot of times things are really miscommunicated in a fan base community, and it just leads to a lot of unwarranted drama. And yeah.
And it's really, really unnecessary too, because most of the time the fan base is chill. It's just that 10% who are just on something else. They just want a wild. But
that's why
it's so unnecessary. And an example of this is Zoe Laverne and Charlie D'Amelio fans, because I've seen them all the time in comment sections just making unsolicited comments and little comment wars, and I'm just so confused. And it's really, really unnecessary, but they do it anyway. Yeah. And once again, these influencers aren't your best friends. You're not going to get an award for defending them, quote unquote. In the end, what's going to happen is going to happen. And your little comments won't really do much.
Yeah, a lot of times these controversies, quote unquote, they're
not that deep.
Yeah, they should be private, but they are made public.
Yeah. And also, we need to stop making excuses for influencers too, especially in terms of toxic. We need to stop making excuses for influencers as well. I see a lot of people try to speculate, be like, oh no, this person didn't do this because this and this and this happened, and this probably happened, and they would never. Do you know? Like, were you there?
Yeah.
Do you have evidence?
It's honestly best to just keep your mouth shut if you don't know the full story of something.
Yep.
Yeah. Don't take sides. Consume media critically. Consume content critically. That works for both ends.
Yeah.
Referring back to what we said on activism.
We're going to talk about the very thin line between performative and genuine activism for influencers. And this obviously happens for people in general, that in everyday life, but it's so much more magnified for influencers because they're put under a microscope.
It's hard because I think a lot of times good intentions can be twisted and basically dumped on.
Yeah. There was this trend on TikTok, I think a month ago, and it was with the song Venom. And it was a song that was used to uplift women. And there was this one video, I'm not sure what her name was, but it was basically her being like, I tell my boyfriend like all of these things in terms of like, feminism and activism and stuff. And then, the boyfriend does the same. He's like a very big feminist and an activist. And although on like, when you initially see it, you may be like, oh yeah, well, cool, chill, right? So many people took with this and ran. They were like, well, men can't really be feminists either, or blah, blah, blah. And once again, I'm not very educated or researched on this topic specifically, so I don't know. But a lot of people kind of just
assumed that it wasn't genuine.
Yeah, they were like, wow, you can do that. That's like the bare minimum. And I was like, yeah, it kind of is, but like, there's no need for you to kind of go out of your way
to scrutinize this.
Yeah, because like, the intentions were right. I don't see anything wrong with the post initially. But like, people just didn't like it for some reason. Once again, I'm not very educated. Please don't cancel me.
Yeah. And there's also a very big push from fan bases, especially for influencers to talk about issues that they might not be qualified to talk about. And a lot of times it's better to just, for them to, instead of saying their own words on it, it's better for them to quote somebody else,
Yeah. A lot of people push Charli D'Amelio to talk about Black Lives Matter and all of these other various movements, which, sure, it is important for people to use their platform for good, but that does not mean that Charli D'Amelio is the best person to go to talk about movements like Black Lives Matter.
It's better if she took resources from Black people, Black activists,
Black content creators, if she would recommend their channels or their content rather than trying to take a stance on something that she's not necessarily the best fit to talk about.
Yeah, there are more qualified people to talk about these things because they have firsthand experience. They are probably more educated, and there's nothing wrong with quoting somebody. There's nothing wrong with uplifting another voice. That's better to talk about these things.
Yeah. So next time, instead of pushing for someone to talk about something that that they're not going to be very familiar with, you should be going to resources, going to content creators who do know things about this, who have experienced these things firsthand and can give you that.
It's not necessarily a content creator or an influencer's obligation to speak on these movements or human rights issues, but if you feel strongly inclined towards one, then you should not be relying on content creators to spread the message for you. Although they do have a big platform, you should not be depending on them to share things. You should be looking towards them yourself.
I feel like a lot of people have the wrong definition of being an activist and, activism in general, which we will talk about in the future as we plan to make an episode about performative activism versus genuine activism. But your quote unquote approval of a certain movement does not make you an activist. It does not make you an ally either. If you actually have something to contribute to this movement, if you actually take steps to make a change, then that's an allyship, that's activism. Not just makes sense, this is a good movement. That's not going to do it.
Yeah. Building off our last point, we shouldn't rely on influencers for important information. Because often there is misinformation, the information comes from a wrong perspective, and oftentimes it's not educated or not thoroughly researched.
Yeah.
And although influencers do have a very large platform, again, they are not obligated to share things. It is their platform to use after all, and it sometimes can be understandably disappointing. However,
Influencers are humans too. You can't expect them to be perfect in every aspect.
you follow these influencers for their content. You don't follow them for their activism. You follow activists for that, you know? Because of this, we should definitely uplift activist platforms for activism, because that is what their platforms are for. There's a difference between activists and influencers for a reason. You go to one for something, and you go to one for another. It is not a one-way street. I don't know if that's the analogy to use.
And a point that Amy made that I thought was really interesting. I feel like many people compare one influencer's activism to another's. It somewhat connects back to the idea that influencers are not obligated to share anything, but also to just how people treat movements/activism in general. The culture and actions surrounding support in general is so hypocritical and selfish, as people always prioritize or compare different movements when each movement has its own importance and its own significance and aren't meant to be compared.
Yeah, a lot of times people will share information, they will support a cause, but others want them to do the same thing for another. But the thing is that I think a lot of people have to understand, and we'll probably elaborate on this in a future episode, but you should not be expected to know everything about every single movement or every single human rights issue in the world. It's a lot of information, and it's a lot of dedication to doing so, and it's probably not possible. And the thing is, you can definitely say, like, yeah, I support the cause of this movement, but you don't have to be, like, an active ally of it. If you're already dedicated to some other movements, then that doesn't mean you have to dedicate all of your time and all of your life into these movements if you don't want to.
And support shouldn't be conditional either. Just because one or two people fail to support your movement doesn't mean that negates all of the support that the community overall has for a certain movement. Stop Asian hate and then Black Lives Matter. Like, it's like there's so much discourse going on back and forth about, like, you didn't help me, so, like, why should I help you? And I was like, we should be helping each other. Like, POC solidarity won't exist, but it should exist. Yeah, I'm all for it. Like, it's like, so many people are like, POC solidarity won't exist, and I don't think it will either, because, like, there's just so much separation and, like, disconnect between. As long as the message of an influencer is a positive one and does not push harmful messages in general, then it's all chill. They're not obligated to do anything for you. They're not obligated to be an activist for you.
Yeah. And alternatives to influencers for things pertaining to sharing info is, of course, as we've mentioned a lot of times previously, activists. There's a lot of activists I know on Twitter, social media. Some are really prevalent in media and news. Organizations and causes are definitely also some things you should support, but definitely look into
the organization itself.
Yeah, and where their money goes, what the organization also supports, etc. Because a lot of organizations don't necessarily help the people that they promise to.
And finally, books are a great source of information, especially because it is reliable. Most books are thoroughly researched with credited sources and citations, and it's made by people who know what they're talking about. So books are a great resource to look into, and they typically give information from a neutral standpoint. And obviously, if you're looking into something that's more biased, then you're going to get something more biased. But they're typically neutral, so they're going to help you create your own opinion rather than trying to push a certain narrative onto you.
That concludes our 8th episode of Table for Two about influencer culture.
If we did say anything that's wrong or a little sketchy, please let us know through our contact forms. It's in our link tree, which is in our episode description and in our Spotify description. So, yeah.
Feel free to reach us anytime. My name's Amy.
My name's Viveka, and we're
Signing off.
Check this.
You can find our episode credits, contact/feedback forms, socials, and YouTube channel all at linktree.com/table-for-two-pod, which you can find in our episode and Spotify bio. See you next Wednesday with a brand new episode.